Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast. Thank you very much for joining us here on our YouTube channel. Well, hey, today we've got a great interview for you all about agricultural real estate. I'm telling you, if you're buying your first farm, if you're leasing your first farm, if you're looking to sell, you want to be involved in buying and selling agricultural real estate. We've got it all for you today in episode number 864 of the Off-Farm Income Podcast with a great interview with Skye Root, the owner of Root Agricultural Advisory. You're really going to enjoy getting to know Skye, and you are going to learn a lot. Let's get into it for you right now. Skye, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. And before I forget, I've got to give a shout out and a thanks to our mutual friend Tim Hammerich of the Ag Grad and Future of Agriculture podcast and all that for connecting us. That was really nice of him to do.
Absolutely. He's going places and doing things. So
that's right. Yeah, he's doing great. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and it's ironic that I had talked to Tim about this, and I know you're not a podcaster yet, but we'll work on that. But I had talked to Tim about this a while back. I had met Tim when he was still living down in Austin, and he was a guest on my show, and we did vice versa and all of that. And then he moved up here. He lives just the other side of the Treasure Valley from me. I'm in Kuna. He's in Eagle. And you're not too far from me in southwest Boise. And I said, we need to turn Boise into the hub for agricultural podcasters. And now both he and I have now connected with you, so we got to get you podcasting. And, man, we're well on our way.
There you go. Yeah, well, we'll see if we can make that happen.
Okay. Well, so tell us a little bit about yourself. I want to talk about Root Agricultural Advisory here in a second, but give us the overview of you away from your business.
You bet. Yeah. So I grew up on a farm in Eastern Oregon, big hay farm and cattle ranch, and did my schooling in both Utah and Oregon. Kind of have a background in economics and water law.
Okay.
And then spent some along the way, met and married my wife, who's a Texan.
Okay.
We won't hold that against her. And we've had 4 kids and been in Boise for ever since grad school. So it's been 11 years now that we've been here.
Okay.
We love Treasure Valley. This is a great place to live. And but yeah, that's and I've spent my whole career working in ag. Started out in water rights specifically, and then worked for a pension fund. Worked for them for several years, 7 I think, and then been doing my own thing for a couple.
Okay. Where in Eastern Oregon?
Burns.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In the Great Basin. The water does not leave Burns, Oregon.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It was a great place to grow up, but unless I wanted to work for my dad, I don't know that it's a great place to live for the rest of your life. And no knock to working for my dad, but I think him and I were too much alike to be working together every single day.
So I've got a ton of listeners, in all over the country. Most of them are not going to understand how remote Burns, Oregon is.
Oh, I can frame it for you. So picture a town of 5,000 people, and you have to drive 150 miles north, 120 miles west, 160 miles east, and about 200 miles south to get to any other town that is at least of the same size.
Yeah, that's my impressions as well. So Boise is the most remote, large-sized city, I guess, in the entire country. But for a smaller city like Burns, they are remote. And, of course, Burns is, I've stayed in Burns. We pulled a trailer to the Oregon coast once, and our first night was in Burns at a little RV park there. But we went to a wedding about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, down outside of Christmas Valley. Have you ever been through Christmas Valley?
Oh, I see. Oh, we could spend the whole conversation talking about Christmas Valley.
Yeah.
So I spent my childhood putting up. My dad was a custom hay contractor, and I spent my whole summers in Christmas Valley living in a camp trailer.
Oh my goodness! Well, I found it. There was a couple things about that drive that blew my mind. First of all, it's called Christmas Valley, and it's the irony to me is Oregon. When you say Oregon, you don't think Burns, you don't think Christmas Valley, you think Willamette Valley, you think coastal, pine trees, green, lush, all of this. And in a state that's known for pine trees and being green and lush, Christmas Valley could not be further away from green and lush, and there wasn't a pine tree in sight in that place.
Yeah. So my analogy would be you feel like you've been dropped on the moon.
And I can't we turned off of highway, I think it's 395, and went west into Christmas Valley. And that there's a line of transmission poles that follows that road, and it just goes on like for 65 miles, just nothing but power poles. It was, I don't know, it was an interesting drive for sure.
Yeah, for sure. There's some very large cattle ranches out there, like on the tune of over 100,000 acres in one tract of ownership. It's the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, 100,000 acres, they can run 40 head. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. A little better than that, but yeah, not much.
I know. But that drive on our way back, instead of staying on Highway 20 or whatever that is and going over to Ontario, Oregon to get back to the Treasure Valley, the Boise area, we actually cut south and went down through Burns Junction and over through Jordan Valley. And I think it was like an extra 10 minutes or extra 10 miles. But man, that was a beautiful drive. That was really pretty, going south from Burns down through there and cutting back up through the Treasure Valley. But yeah,
good part of the world. That's I love being from there and proud of it. It's a neat place.
And where in Texas is your wife from?
Dallas, north of Dallas.
Okay.
Little well, it used to be a little farming community. Now it's a suburb community of like 200,000 people, but McKinney is the name of the town.
Okay. Well, I know you made that joke about Texas. You should know that the rank of my downloads on the show goes California first, Texas second. So good luck with that, Skye. Good luck with that.
Yeah, no, that's right. I'll tell you, I love Texans, to be honest with you. I just don't like the humidity. You got to remember, we just talked about me being from the desert of Oregon. So as long as you keep me from the humidity, then I'm good to go. But no, I have rarely met better people than Texans. I love dealing with Texans.
I love Texas too. It seems like any book I read anymore is always about Texas. I'm reading another one about Texas right now. Fascinating place. Okay, so water law. I took a ag law class in college, and I really liked it. But just like I was never going to be cut out to go to vet school, I certainly wasn't cut out to go to law school. So that's where that began, and where that ended. Did you go to law school?
So Oregon State had a master's program in public policy that allowed me to focus on water law.
Okay.
So I did not go to law school, but I can hang with most attorneys when it comes to property law and water law, but any other aspect of the law, and I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Okay. Yeah, water law is a big deal out here in the West. That is significant.
Yeah, and even it creeps over. Speaking of Texas, I mean, when I was a water rights consultant, I spent probably 6 months working on several projects in West Texas involving water rights and water battles and cities buying water and a variety of things. So once you get past West Texas, though, and kind of draw a line north, they have different water fights in the east.
Yeah.
And in the south, they're trying to, it's all about quality. It's all about getting rid of it. But in the West, we all fight about water quantity.
Correct.
Who's going to use it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Where I grew up in the Central Valley of California, we used to do all irrigation based off of runoff from the Sierra Nevadas, surface irrigation, and then people started pumping a lot of water down there, and it's been interesting to see how that's all evolved over time. But I know in West Texas there's a lot of pumping that goes on, and there's the Ogallala Aquifer that everybody is, that's an argument, and that's something they've got to deal with. So I'm sure you were dealing with that as well.
I was very front and center in some of those conversations. So it's water's for fighting, that's for sure. So you didn't mention where you're from. Where are you from in Central Valley?
I grew up in a very small town called Valley Home, which is about 15 miles northeast of Modesto, if you know where that is.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Well, so let's talk. Well, one other thing. In your bio, you said you worked 7 years for a hedge fund. Is that right?
A pension fund,
A pension fund.
Yeah, so it was. I actually worked for a company called Westchester that was the asset manager for a large pension fund, TIAA. Used to be TIAA Cref.
Yep.
And now they're actually Nuveen is what they're called. But yeah, Nuveen's eventually who wrote my paycheck, but I worked for Westchester.
Okay.
In terms of the company, they're a big farmland manager.
Okay. And so, what was your job there? What were you supposed to be doing?
So I was essentially their acquisition director in the West for row crops, and managed on the farm management side, managed a big portfolio of assets that they owned all the way Washington, Oregon, California, Idaho. So just out here in the West.
Interesting. And so you were acquiring properties for the pension fund?
I was. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
So a very small sliver. If you think about a pension fund, they have stocks, bonds, private equity investments, all those sorts of things. People and TIA specifically, a lot of college professors, doctors, lawyers, those types of folks that are professionals that are putting money into the fund as part of their retirement account. And a very small sliver of that fund went into farmland investing. And there's quite a bit of funds that are similar to that. When I first started my career 10 years ago, there was maybe 4 or 5 bigger ones. And today those are still around, but now there's probably over 100 that are kind of startups, and a lot of capital has flowed to this space in the last 10 years. It's really unbelievable, actually.
Wow. So the pension fund will purchase the actual dirt and then lease it to a farmer, a row crop farmer?
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting.
Most of them take operational risk on permanent crops. So on the almonds, pistachios, apples, cherries, things like that, wine grapes, they hire a local manager to run it. Okay. And then they take the risk on the commodity side, in terms of pricing and yield and stuff like that. But on most row crops, any sort of potatoes or corn and soybeans or any of that kind of stuff, it's just cash rented to local farmers. Okay.
Interesting stuff. Well, man, I don't know about this year or the last 2 or 3 years, but about 5 years ago, being in almonds, that would have been a heck of a thing for your pension fund. My goodness.
Yeah, it was beyond double-digit returns. It was, it wasn't triple-digit returns, but yeah, in those days, there was a run of about 36 months there where if you got into the land base early enough before it started going up there in Central Valley, you were making 20 to 25% income return. It was unreal.
That is. Huh.
But it didn't last long, and now it's back down to 7%.
Right. So how long have you been out on your own?
So a couple years, yeah. So a little less than 2 years, actually, slightly less.
So here's a question, because this show, I always talk about using entrepreneurship for people to be able to fund the lifestyle they're looking for, namely farming and working in agriculture, having their own project or whatever that may be. What made you want to go out on your own?
Well, I was raised by an entrepreneur. My dad is a serial entrepreneur, owns so many different businesses, and I watched him do that and grow his farm and different, concrete plants and other things that he's involved in, rental stores and stuff. And so I guess I kind of had it in my blood. But when I worked for the fund, I got started a little bit by owning some cows and some small farmland type stuff that could give me an alternative source of income when I did go out on my own in case I was starving to death for the first little while. But eventually, the reason I wanted to go out on my own was for the freedom of being able to kind of chart my course, I guess, and pursue a variety of things that I was interested in instead of just farmland investing, which is one thing I'm interested in. But I think that's really the fundamental reason I went out on my own, is so I could do 10 different things instead of one.
Okay. All right. So you have a broad horizon of interests.
I do, for sure.
Well, that brings us to Root Agricultural Advising. So what is it? Give us I hate to say elevator speech because everybody says that. Just give us the overview of everything that you do and you offer now.
You bet. Yeah. So Root Ag Advisory kind of has 4 pillars: farm management, where we manage farms for private clients and institutional investors; real estate brokerage. I'm a broker in 6 Western. So second pillar would be real estate brokerage. I'm a broker in 6 Western states, and again, really just an ag is all I focus on, and some ranches, mostly farms. And then the third pillar would be soil biologicals, which is a bit random, but my dad is an organic farmer, and I grew up in the organic hay space and learned about a variety of different kind of regenerative ag type stuff back 25 years ago before anybody talked about it that way.
Sure.
And so I have, I guess, a personal weird passion for soil biologicals and what they can do for especially a lot of these Western sandy loam soils. Okay. So I rep some biological products that's fairly synergistic when I'm out and about on farms, whether it's managing or brokering or doing different things. I'm out in the space anyways. And so meeting with farmers and talking to them about biologicals is fairly a fairly easy lift. So, and then the fourth pillar, I guess, would be more consulting based. And that's a lot of, it's kind of, I help different people. And maybe if I'm not involved as the broker, or I'm not ever going to be the farm manager, they don't want a farm manager, but they need somebody with some ag expertise to do some consulting, whether it's financial consulting, whether it's, due diligence expertise to kind of look at an asset and give them my opinion. So I do some of that kind of stuff as well. But, the big two would be the brokerage and the farm management, and the smaller two would be the biologicals and the consulting. But that's kind of me. And I currently have 2 full-time employees, and probably grow to a third, and then a few part-time employees. Okay. So it's away we go.
Okay. All right. Now, when you say farm management to me, and I know I've got the wrong viewpoint here, I want you to straighten me out. But I'm picturing farm manager being the guy that's in the nicest tractor, but still in the tractor. Now,
yes. So I wish. Yeah, okay. That's not it. But no. So when you think of a farm manager in the context that I'm saying it, think of it in the context of, let's say Matt owns an apartment building in Modesto, and you don't live there, and you hire a property manager to kind of keep track of making sure it's rented at market rates, making sure it's, cleaned up and stays in good repair, making sure the property taxes get paid, that type of stuff. So think about a residential or a commercial property manager, and we're effectively doing the same thing for these pension funds or private clients that are absentee owners. We're basically babysitting the asset for them.
Got it.
And making sure that they're being treated fairly out there in the marketplace.
Okay. So you're taking a percentage off the rent like a property manager would?
Yep.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. So there's 3 people involved in the transaction. There's the landowner, there's the renter, and then there's you, who is making sure everything gets signed, everything gets paid, and everything's adhered to. Okay. Interesting. So I suppose you probably found your clients by your connections you had from working in the pension fund.
Correct. Yeah. That and water rights consulting. So the first couple of years before I worked for the pension fund, I also, when you're a consultant, I met a lot of people all over the West. And so between that and some societies that I'm a part of, and then contacts I made when I worked for the pension fund, that's kind of been how I've built out the network over the last 10 plus years.
Okay. Well, let's talk real estate. So the original reason I reached out to you is because I wanted to get your advice for our listeners on things they should be doing when they're looking for that first piece of ground, whether they're purchasing, whether they're leasing, and really regardless of the scope or the size. So if they're like me, and of course with the podcast, your audience generally falls in line, not in line like they're supposed to, but people gravitate towards people they're like. So even though I don't know all my audience members personally, there's going to be a lot of audience members like me who came out of middle-class incomes, jobs in the city, who wanted to buy a piece of ground, and they're either still close to town, or they went way far away so they could afford ground, or they bought less ground because they're close to town because it's more expensive, and they're finding a way to make it work. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with. But not everybody. I've got quite a few listeners who are in production ag as well. But those folks, though, they've probably, I don't know, I guess you could give advice to all of them on acquiring land, leasing ground, and stuff like that. But I definitely want to touch on the folks who have decided they want this lifestyle, who are going to go out and they're going to purchase that first piece of ground. I want to know, what advice you would have for them. What should they be looking for? What pitfalls should they try and avoid? All that type of stuff.
Absolutely. No, that's great. It's a great question. I mean, it's the fundamental analysis, I think, associated with whether you're buying a 20-acre, I'll call it a hobby farm,
okay, yeah,
or that, and I'll silo my comment by saying that some people intend to buy a 20-acre hobby farm and keep the job in town and always just have the 20-acre hobby farm, and that's what they want, and they don't want anything else. And so I think there's a subset of a conversation to that particular person. There's another person, I think, that buys the 20-acre hobby farm with the intent to become a 1,000-acre grower. Someday they want to grow into being a bigger grower rather than just own the hobby farm, and that's all they really ever wanted was the 20 acres. And so I think those are two separate conversations. Then obviously somebody in already in heavy production ag, that's that maybe might be a third conversation. But the irony is that whether you're any of those three buckets, the analysis to purchasing or how I would approach a agricultural real estate transaction is the same. Okay. It doesn't matter if you're going to buy 5,000 acres or if you're going to buy 20. Okay. When it involves farmland, there's some kind of big key things I think you want to know. So I would say you need to know history. That's a really important thing when it comes to farmland situations. When you go to buy a house, you don't need to know the history. You're going to do what you want with it. Yeah. But when you buy a farm, you may think that you have a master plan, and maybe you do have a master plan that's going to work better than every other schmuck that's ever owned that piece of ground, but maybe not. Yeah. And so I think it's really important that you do a good job of analyzing what have they been doing on this farm for the last 10 years. What have the yields been? What have they been growing? And it could be one of those scenarios where you're trying to up the value. It could be somebody that owned a small farm and they were running cows on it, and just had pasture, and yet the soil profile and the neighbors and everybody else is growing potatoes or onions or some other type of a crop. So it's having that observation, really having your eyes wide open to not only your farm but what surrounds it, and getting the history of your farm. And then, I guess I'm evolving into a second comment, but the second thing I'd be looking for is the surrounding area. Go look at all the neighbors, look at what they're growing, look at what their places look like, and even go talk to some of them. Talk to them about, where you get your water from. And it takes water to grow crops regardless of where you live. So, I guess if you're in Indiana or Illinois, you're getting it from Mother Nature. Right. But in most other places, you're going to want to ask, where are you getting your water? What time is it coming? Is it ever a problem? What battles do you fight? Just asking those kind of people. In my experience, the people are willing to talk to you. It's the culture. So they're kind of more than happy to do that. So, and then maybe a third quick comment, and you can kind of interject and we can take it whatever direction we want, would be to really think hard about valuation. Because when it comes to doing a real estate transaction, we may get to talking about this a little later on, but not all brokers are created equal in the agricultural space. No disrespect to any sort of a residential or commercial broker, because they know their business and they do their thing, and I have respect for that. Just for the very same reason that I don't get involved in residential. I don't like to see it when a residential guy gets involved in ag, mostly because you end up with a lot of misconceptions and just a knowledge gap that is it's sometimes really hard to overcome. So I've seen many deals blow up because somebody that's ag is not their background, in brokerage space. They convince somebody to list a property for double what it's worth because they don't understand. And, and then there's a lot of consternation and people get offended and, some of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, if as a buyer, if you aren't really careful about understanding and knowing what the valuation should be based on what the farm can produce or those types of things, you really can get taken to school on your first small farmland purchase, and you don't want your first buy to be your worst buy when it comes to buying a farm. It's not a good idea.
Okay, a couple things there I want to go back to. You talked about finding out what that farmer had been getting in terms of yield. How do you find that out?
Ask for it.
Okay. So is that after you've made an offer or when you're sniffing around and you're thinking about making an offer?
Yeah, it all. So the way I would do it is I would put it in the offer. So in the other terms and conditions type, every state's different in how you structure that. But one of the things I ask for in a farmland acquisition is production records, water use records, power records, just request all those things in the purchase agreement so they know what it is that you want from them.
Okay.
So that there's no surprises. And I find if you do that too, when you're haggling back and forth on a PSA, then the seller becomes a lot more aware of what it is exactly that you're going to want, and they're a lot more prepared to give it to you on time because you tend to ask for a lot more information.
Okay. And what's a PSA?
Purchase and sale agreement.
Okay. All right. Okay. Interesting. So you put that right. So, but if you do that, then you've already done your valuation, because if you're making that offer, you've got an offer. You've offered a certain amount for that farm.
That's right.
So what do you do then if you've already made the offer, so you've already evaluated the farm, then they come back with yield numbers that you don't like? What do you do?
Yeah, you rehaggle the deal, or you walk away. So that's and for depending on how the stakes are and the market climate and the feeding frenzy that might exist or whatever, you may be able to get that information from them, yield information, that kind of stuff on the valuation front sooner before you sign a contract. Certainly the sooner the better when you get that information, but sometimes people don't want to share it until they know that you're the horse they're taking to the race. So, and maybe an alternate comment would be that there's not like a Zillow for farmland, but what there is appraisers that are very specialized in your area, and go look them up. Google farm and ranch appraiser, Boise, Idaho, and there's going to be like 4 of them that are really kind of active in that space. Call one of those people up, and in 2 minutes, a 2-minute conversation, you're going to be able to feel a little bit more informed if you don't have a lot of data so far.
Okay. And you brought up an interesting thing when you were talking about valuation, and this is something this is the reason I push entrepreneurship for people. So the origins of this show were, how can you, because there's this puzzle out there, right? People want to farm, but there's so many obstacles to entry. How can you make this work? How can somebody actually get this done? And then there's a bit of pride of ownership that works its way into this too. A lot of people get started and become big, successful 1,000-acre farmers like you're talking about by leasing a lot of ground. But there's a lot of people that they want at least a home place. They want part of it to be in, they want it to belong to them, and they want to have their farm. And so that's always been, when I first started this journey back in 2010, 2011, that was a big piece of the puzzle, is how in the world do you get started with that first piece of ground? And one of the things I've come across, and obviously I've stayed close to Boise. I'm in Kuna. And so for everybody listening, I've talked about it quite a bit, but we're experiencing a ton of urban sprawl and a lot of farm grounds getting turned into subdivisions with white vinyl fences right now. So what that does is, if you stay close enough to a metropolitan center like I have, it really jacks the price of the ground up. And the valuation of that ground is not based just on its production capability. It's based on a bunch of other intangibles that you don't care about because you're interested in farming. However, those things are all impacting your ability to buy that piece of ground. And so I push entrepreneurship because, in my mind, that gives you because there's a catch-22. So I have the option of going out far enough away that the value of the ground I'd be buying would be based on its production capability and nothing else, right? However, once I get out that far, how am I going to produce my off-farm income? Because the jobs aren't going to be out there. Or if they are out there, they're not going to be competitive to what I'm making in town. And so that's why I push entrepreneurship, to try and close that gap and to solve that problem, which is, if you can start your own business and it allows you to live out there, well, then you can have the best of both worlds. You can have ground where the value is based on its production capability, and you can still create that off-farm income. So that's what I've been saying for years. Now I want you to tell me whether or not I've been right or wrong to say that dichotomy kind of exists.
No, it absolutely exists. I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, and I think there's a lot of different schools of thought. I know people that live out, in our valley. I know people that work downtown Boise and live in, 45 minutes away in Parma. because they want to own a couple hundred acres, and they work, in a otherwise, kind of high paying city job.
Right.
But they're rare. There isn't many of them
Yeah.
that kind of want to do that. But yeah, there's absolutely that kind of contradiction and pull in the space.
Yeah, and to explain to everybody, we're not Atlanta and we're not LA, but we do have a traffic problem here. And so for somebody who works in downtown Boise and has their farm in Parma, they've got, because of traffic, if they work conventional hours, they've got a serious commute issue every single day. With no public transportation that could help them skip that commute. They've got to drive it. They got to get caught in the bottleneck every single day. So they're an hour plus commute one way every day if they're driving during normal commute hours coming from Parma. And see, that's another thing I've always worried about for folks, especially younger folks who have a dream of farming, is that when they're trying to start a farm and their ultimate goal is to farm. It's not just to have their place. It's not just to have their elbow room, but they really truly do want to farm. My worry has always been that if you're an hour drive to work, an hour drive home in traffic, you got 8 hours minimum at your job. There you got 10 hours invested in your day here, and you're not on the farm for that 10 hours. What if you need to be on the farm? And what if you're a brand new farmer and being on the farm that day would be the thing that would help you to succeed? But if you're not there because that heifer is having her first calf, or because rain's coming and you need to bale the hay, or whatever it may be, there's an outbreak of something that needs to be sprayed, or whatever that may be, to me that separates the wheat from the chaff when it comes to a new farmer and who's going to succeed and who's not going to get the yields off of their farm, however you define that, to be able to grow that farm. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in my opinion, you have to keep it small enough that you can handle, given the constraints that you have in your own kind of setup. And if you're, I guess I would wholeheartedly agree with your entrepreneurship concept that it really matters what your size, keeping it small enough to handle what your personal constraints are. And if your fundamental goal is to become a bigger farmer, then you can't, it's going to be really tough to have the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
The long commute, what you just described. I mean, having a farm that's close to town and being able to scale that up is going to be really hard.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care where you live. So because of that urban sprawl and that land values not being based on production alone, that's that whole thesis that I agree with. So I think you have to decide, it kind of goes back to my different buckets, I guess, the way I painted it. Do you want to be the 20-acre hobby farmer that
right.
just, you're not trying to maximize yield per se. You're just trying to grow something
right.
and sell it and enjoy it. Or are you trying to become the 1,000-acre guy? And if you're going to become the 1,000-acre guy, you have to either get a job closer to home where you can be more flexible. You have to get, I see a lot of guys that are, smaller farmers wanting to grow that are fertilizer salesmen,
yeah.
or they're, I don't know what a variety of different kind of agronomist type stuff, field scouts, people like that, because they can be out and about. They can swing by their farm for a couple hours. They can go back and do their thing. So it's that, that lifestyle is acceptable to what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's my number one example of a job that will allow you to do that, being a crop advisor, because you're working in ag, you're in and about the area, you're mobile, you've got less, it's not as strict on where you need to be at a certain time. So if you're irrigating, you got something going on at the farm, you can run by and you can take care of that and you can get it done. But we've got a lot of people in this audience who have come to a realization that, man, I want to go back to that lifestyle, or I want to go into that lifestyle, and they've never been in it, and they didn't go to college. They didn't go to college for agronomy, or they didn't go to college.
Oh, yeah.
So they don't have the qualifications to go and take a job as a crop advisor or something like that. So a crop advisor can sit out there right next to their farm with a flexible schedule and make $100,000-$200,000 a year and build their farm up. But you can't do that if you're not qualified.
Nope. Yeah, that's right. So you got to work within the constraints you have. But no, I agree with you. I think where there's a will, there's a way, though, in accomplishing what you want to do, getting to where you want to be, if you really want to be in that spot. So
Yeah, interesting stuff. Well, I mean, it's just one of those things. I talk to people about entrepreneurship and go, look, I'm not a natural born entrepreneur. You're lucky, Skye. You're a natural born entrepreneur. I was not. I had to really convince myself to start my first business. And looking back now, the risk I took was minimal. I mean, it was not that big a deal at all, but it felt like the decision of a lifetime to me. And so there's a lot of people that way, but I tell people, it's a means to an end. Being an entrepreneur, starting your own business, if that business works, you're not done. That's just what you've created to help you be able to live where you need to live so you can farm. And so that's why I push that. That's really interesting. Well, along the lines of jobs that could allow you to live out away from the city and be able to manage your farm the way you need to manage your farm to succeed and to grow, other than crop advisor, I think another one is selling farm and ag real estate. What are your thoughts on that?
For sure, yeah, I would say that's definitely an option. The pros and cons, right? There's a lot of pros to flexible schedule,
Mm-hmm.
being in the space, being out and about. The cons would be that it takes a specialized knowledge. So if you're a
Mm-hmm.
if you're not at all affiliated with ag right now, and you desire to become a farmer, kind of leave your current career and jump into farming and perhaps start ag real estate, there's just going to be a big learning curve for you to jump up, because if you're already farming, then you at least have that kind of skill set. You have to learn about real estate, and you have to learn about some legal stuff, and you can go to real estate school and learn the basics of that and,
Mm-hmm.
and get out in the space. But I'd say the biggest hurdle to just kind of getting into that career path is the network and the relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's a great way to do it. And I know, I mean, most ag real estate brokers I know have some sort of a small farm type of a setup.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's because it's the one would argue maybe chicken or the egg in terms of why one versus the other. But I
Yeah.
think my strong opinion would be that we are successful ag brokers because we have one foot in the farming,
Mm-hmm.
and so we get it. We're part of the community. We understand what's going on, and that allows us to be kind of successful. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I would say in terms of those that are really ultimately successful at being a farmer and an ag broker. It's because they're really out in the space, and they know they have the relationships.
What's the difference between being a broker and an agent?
Yeah, so generally, I mean, every state is different. For example, like in Oregon, not that your audience really cares, but you have a managing broker and you have just a plain broker. They don't have agents in Oregon. Other states have agents and brokers, but as a general comment, an agent would be a kind of a quote unquote lesser experienced and not responsible for the whole firm. Whereas brokers, and again, some states parcel that even off to where you have associate brokers, which kind of just shows you're more experienced, as opposed to maybe a designated broker or a managing broker, a principal broker that would denote that you're the guy in charge.
Okay.
So, but in general, agent is less experienced, broker's more experienced, and usually the one that's in charge of the operation.
Okay. Now, for somebody who's going to go out and they're going to start shopping for that first piece of land, they've never bought property before, maybe a house, but not property they want to put into production. How should they go about finding the right agent or broker? How should they find the right person who's going to have the expertise they need so they can make a good first-time decision? Because you said first-time decisions, that's pivotal. That's the important one.
Absolutely. I'll stand by that comment for sure. So I'd say it's a tiered approach, Matt. First of all, if they're truly making all these decisions in a vacuum and they're the first one to foray out into the country and they don't really know anybody else that's out there, then it might be a different tier, but of decision making process and vetting and what have you. But if they're not, if they happen to have connections out in that space, start networking. and talk to their friends, talk to their family that might have done something like that, and ask those people, hey, who'd you use to help you, or do you know anybody that's a ag real estate agent that knows what they're doing? Start asking around to different people. Yeah, it's actually ironic because I was just talking to my sister yesterday about this. I come from a big family, got a bunch of younger sisters, and one of my sisters actually lives in Hawaii, and is getting ready to buy her first house. And buying your first house in Hawaii is kind of like buying your first farm in Idaho. Very, very expensive. And so anyway, she one of the maybe a second tier comment would be after the networking comment would be what I told her yesterday. Remember, you are the client. They are the agent. Interview them. Don't feel obligated that you have to do something or have to go with somebody. You're the one that's doing the interviewing. You're the one that's doing the hiring. They're the one that's going to get paid. And so it's just my strong advice to anybody to never feel sheepish about asking hard questions like, hey, broker so-and-so, tell me how many farms you traded last year. How many listings you currently have? What's your history in this space? Ask those hard questions. Don't just assume they know what they're talking about, because candidly, many of them don't. Yeah. So you can figure it out pretty quick with a few good pointed questions. So that would be a strong recommendation I would give is to do that, and then maybe from there you can generally tell based on somebody's presence, whether it's an online presence. There's some really good ag brokers that are of a different generation and don't have much of an online presence, which is fine. But they're going to have some sort of a presence in a newspaper, in a, some billboard, I don't know, something that in general, somebody who's willing to spend high dollars on marketing or has a good website that oftentimes in the ag space, I won't say this for commercial and residential, but in the ag space, that often means that they're making enough money, which means they know what they're doing. Okay. So just another kind of maybe tertiary betting.
Yeah. One thing begets another. Okay. So one last topic I want to cover before we wrap it up, and that is farm succession. Does a broker have any role in farm succession planning? And I don't necessarily even mean from one family member to another. But what if? Well, I'll give you a little backstory. So I did about a month. So in 2015, when I first started this show, I did a whole month devoted to how can you go out and get started farming. And my one caveat or my one rule of thumb for all my listeners is you need to be able to be willing to relocate. And you can make it happen. You truly want to farm, you need to put farming above where you live, because you got to go to where you can farm. So that was my one stipulation. But then I did all these interviews over that month, and one of the things that came up was you've got these different organizations out there in the States, and you got a national, you got an international organization for farm succession in matching up people who want to farm with retiring farmers who don't have anybody to pass that farm to. And one of the guys I interviewed said, if you figure out where you want to be, or you find an area where you think you can make it work, get down to the coffee shop, start meeting people, shaking hands, find out who is ready to move on, they don't want to farm anymore, and who fits this profile. And even though you're not related, you can set up a farm succession plan with this person, and you can make it work. And it could be an easier way for you to get into farming. Do you have any experience with anything like that?
A little bit, but my kind of career path has been a bit more on the bigger stuff, and but I've heard of that kind of stuff, on the smaller scale, people going and coffee shopping it up, but a lot of the stuff that I deal with, candidly, that's what the ag brokers are doing.
Sure,
that's how they're getting their business.
Yeah,
but that's not that's not how the big farmers transact things, but some of the smaller guys that, and sadly enough, there's a lot of small farmers that are not able to compete anymore. And so you end up with bigger and bigger farms. And so it's, less coffee shop,
sure,
banter, if you will.
Yeah. Less coffee
but I think
shop.
it's a great strategy for the smaller farm situation, I think you could still get that done. I mean, the average farmer in the U.S. is what, like 67?
Yeah.
Something like that. I mean, it's high.
Yeah, I interview a lot of FFA students on this show, and I know I've got people in different metropolitan areas around the country listening who want to farm, and they're trying to figure out how to get it done. And meanwhile, like I interviewed a kid from Colorado, I think, about a year ago, FFA student. He started farming his neighbor's place. He'd always helped him out. He's an older guy, doesn't have any family to pass the farm to. This kid started helping him run his cattle, work his cattle, do his, helped him with everything. Has been working over there full time, and basically they've come up with a plan for this kid to take over that farm, and ultimately for the just a farm succession plan. And here this kid is, he's 17 going on 18, and man, it's laying out in front of him because he's in the area, he's willing to live in that area, and he's got the network going on. So
I love stories like that. I think we need more of that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was really, really an inspirational story. It was very, very cool. Well, Skye, this has been great, man. You're a wealth of information. People want to contact you. People want to know more. Where should they go to find out more about you?
Yeah, so my website, rootagadvisory.com. So that's AG in the middle, ROOTAG advisory.com. I'm on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram. We're on, we may even have a Facebook. I don't know. So, but yeah, you can reach me there, or certainly anytime anytime anybody has a specific question, you can email me. You can find that on the website, but it's my first name, SKYE at ROOTAG advisory.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today.
You bet. That was great to talk to you, Matt.
Well, thank you for being here, everybody. Thank you to Skye Root for joining us today and providing us with great information. And as always, enjoy your journey to the ultimate lifestyle business, agriculture.